What is up, guys? Thanks for tuning in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are, whenever you're watching this video. So today we're going to be doing a timing belt replacement on this Acura MDX. This is a 2001 Acura MDX equipped with the J series motor. I believe it's the J35. And we're going to be replacing this timing belt. It has become loose, and it also has some tear marks on this timing belt. You can't see it, but there it is. Yeah, right. You can see it's split there, and then it's split just a little bit more down below. And yeah, it looks like this thing is time to be replaced, and the tension is quite loose. So we're gonna go ahead and replace this with a new timing belt, new water pump, and new tensioner. So we'll get this all squared away. First, you want to remove your serpentine belt down below there, which is, get a good light on that. So that serpentine belt, so you have that pulley right down below next to the alternator on the left hand side. So you're going to go ahead and put a 14mm wrench on it and go up towards the hood, and that should loosen the belt, and then you should be able to remove it on the alternator side. And then over here, you're going to have to remove the power steering pulley. So this pulley here, you have the belt here. So what you want to do is loosen that bolt there. That is a 12mm bolt. That's going to allow you to move the power steering pump up and down. And then you're also going to want to remove, well, not even remove, just loosen that 12mm bolt down here, down below. And that'll give you access to some play. So you can go ahead and move, you can move the pulley. So with that said, you can see that the pulley has play now. So you can loosen that belt. And when you go to tighten it up, you just tighten up that bolt, and that'll raise the power steering pulley upwards so it can tighten the belt. So with that said, we're gonna get down below, and we're gonna start removing some covers down below, and we're going to remove the serpentine belt, but we're also going to have to remove these two bolts on the engine mount so we can go ahead and put on our new belt. So let's get started. So here we are down here. Obviously we have some things in the way, so we're going to have to remove this plastic cover here. So let's do that now. All right, so I just removed my serpentine belt, and you can clearly see that this serpentine belt is due for replacement. You can see the cracking all along, and it's dry rotted. It's just no good. And the same thing goes for that power steering belt. If you look at that there, it's all cracked. That's no good. So we're going to replace both of those belts along with our timing belt today. Okay, so now you want to remove that 19mm crankshaft bolt, and if you guys are wondering why I'm replacing it, you can clearly see the coolant on the subframe, coolant on the oil pan, and that is definitely just weeping and leaking from the water pump. You can see it, and I just brought this into my garage. So let's loosen that up and go from there. You know how these can be a pain in the butt. There we go. All right, now that we have our crank pulley off, we're going to take out these 10mm bolts for the crank pulley cover. There's a couple. There's one over here. Just note that this one on the right hand side, this is where your dipstick goes, right there in that hole next to this bolt. Let me see if I can get a good view at it. Yeah, right there. That's where your dipstick goes. So your dipstick is going to be blocking that bolt right there. So just make note of that. You are going to have to remove your dipstick, and there's a 10mm bolt that holds the dipstick in right above the tensioner. It's going to be hard to get to, but you'll be able to get to it. And this is the dipstick here. That's the 10mm bolt that holds your dipstick in. So make sure you take that out. So when you take that out, you have your chuck pin So don't lose that. Make sure that that stays with the crank pulley, and just put your bolts aside with your crank pulley as you're doing the job. So now we'll go ahead and we're going to remove those 10mm bolts and get that crank pulley cover off, as well as the camshaft pulleys. Alright guys, so now that we have the camshaft covers and the crankshaft covers off, you want to make sure you align everything before you go ahead and remove the tension off the timing belt. That way everything is in place, so you can put the new timing belt on, and then just to make minor adjustments, and then retension the belt. So here you want to make sure that it's at top dead center, so you have one. You see that one as well. Adjust. So you see that number 1. Yep, there's number 1, number 6 on the right, and then there's number 3 down below. You see that white dot? It's lined up with the mark on the cylinder head. That line right there is lined up with that mark. And then the same on this side, you see the mark above. And then you also have a notch on the cam, and you have a notch up there. You want to make sure those are aligned correctly. And then you just want to check down below. So we'll check down below and make sure that the camshaft is lined up correctly as well. Okay, so now down here on the crankshaft, you want to make sure that that arrow is lined up with the arrow in front of us here. So that's the oil pump arrow onto the crank gear arrow. So you want those to align as well. So all 3 should align up correctly. So now that we have everything lined up, we can go ahead and remove the tension, and try not to move the gears, but remove the tension, and then remove the old timing belt. Alright, so the next step is to remove your tensioner. So you're going to remove these 2 10mm bolts. When you remove these bolts, that's going to remove the tension off of this, which holds the tension on your timing belt. So once you remove this, then you can loosen the 14mm bolt here, and the tension should be completely loose after you do that. So after you do that, then you can carefully slide off your timing belt. So go ahead and carefully slide it off on each camshaft, and then you can remove it from down below on the crankshaft. So we'll do that now. We'll remove our timing belt. All right, now that we have this bracket off, here, so you can take off those 2 14mm bolts, and then there's one 17mm bolt that goes right through the motor mount. Take that out. So now with that out the way, now you have to remove this bracket, and I believe there's 3 bolts right underneath it down below, so we'll have to remove those now. Alright, so there's 2 bolts above here, which they're gonna sit. One right there, and there's one on the opposite side. One right there. And then you have one down below, as you can see right there. So go ahead and remove those 3 and remove the bracket. Okay, so before removing this bracket that is connected to the engine, you're going to need to remove a clip, because if you don't remove the clip, then you'll break the wiring harness. So you don't want to break the wiring harness. There's a 10mm right there, and loosen that up, and then that'll be disconnected from the wiring harness. A lot of important wires over here, so make sure that you do not rip that off, because you will mess up your wiring harness. With that said, you're going to disconnect the bolt completely from the power steering pump, and then there's another bolt down below that goes through the bracket right here, and then it also goes through here. This is the bolt, and then it has a nut on the opposite end, so you'll want to put those two together when you reinstall it. Alright, so with that said, like I said, just disconnect that 10mm bolt to disconnect the harness from the bracket, and you should be able to take that off. And along with the engine motor mount, you will need to remove that one as well. That's 3 14mm bolts. As you can see, 1, 2, 3 there, and then there goes your mount, and it is removed. So you will need to take off all those components to get to this. So after you disconnect that wire harness clip, then you can remove that bracket. So let's do that. Okay, so with that bracket completely removed, again, there's one in the bottom, two on the top. The two are longer, the one on the bottom is shorter. So now that you have that removed, now you'll be able to remove your timing belt, because if you don't remove that, you will never be able to remove your timing belt unless you cut it. And then how are you going to install your new one? So with that said, you have to remove all these components to gain access over here. Plus it gives you a lot more room to work with the little space that we have here. So go ahead and remove the timing belt, and then we'll start working on that water pump right there. All right, so the old water pump is out. This is the new one. So now when you're removing the bolts off of the old water pump, just go ahead, when you remove one off the old water pump, take it out, put it in the new water pump. When you remove that bolt, take it out the old water pump and put it into the new one. So on and so forth, do the same. I believe they are different sizes. I could be wrong, but it's just something that I do every time I replace a component that's very important, like a water pump or things of that nature. And then you also want to change your timing belt pulley. This is the idler pulley, if I'm not mistaken. So with that said, this one's nice and smooth when it turns. This one is a little crunchy, and it's definitely old, so you can see that it's caked up with coolant from the water pump leaking. So this one's no good, so we'll replace it. And then you should also replace that bearing, and then you should also replace the tensioner timing belt pulley. So you got to replace that. Unfortunately, when I ordered my kit, they did not send me one, so now I have to go to the auto parts store and grab one up and waste more money. But it's all part of what we do here as mechanics. Nothing ever goes right, and this video here shows you that. So you're going to replace that as well. I have a new one, and this is pretty much what it looks like once everything is removed. You got your water pump there, and that's where the pulley's going to go. So this one here, simply just take out the 14mm bolt, pull out the old one, put the bolt through the new one, and then just go ahead and you're going to tighten it down, and that goes right there. So that's where we'll put it, and then we'll tighten it down, and then we'll clean off the contact points because my hands are full of grease as well as coolant. So once we tighten that all up, that one is good to go. We'll just hand tighten it for now until we get to the process where we're going to be tightening down the timing belt. So with that said, after this, we're going to go ahead and install the water pump. But before installing the water pump, you can see the previous person put some silicone, so just make sure that you wire brush and clean those contact points, because you don't want any old silicone just hanging out there with the new stuff. So with that said, I'm going to clean all that off with a wire brush or a Scotch pad, and then we'll install the new water pump. So this is the new water pump. I just wanted to make note so you guys know indefinitely why your water pump is bad or why it's leaking. So there's a weep hole here. That's where it leaks out once the bearing goes bad. And if it doesn't leak out there, then it'll leak on the inside once the bearing does go bad. So just listen here. Nice and quiet, nice and smooth. There's no play. So this is the old one. And there's the weep hole. And it looks like I also had some sealant up here. I don't know why, but the last person put silicone all around it. And just listen. You can hear the bearing is shot, and you can't really see it, but there is play when I wiggle this pulley. So unfortunately, this water pump is no good, and it's time to get rid of it. So with that said, we'll move forward. Now that the water pump surface is nice and clean, now we can install the new water pump. All right, now that we have our water pump in, that is good to go with those 10mm bolts. Once they're torqued down to spec, you're good to go. Do not over tighten them or you will have a bad day. So if you haven't already installed that pulley there, go ahead and install it now and torque that to spec. And then we'll move over and get the tensioner pulley installed. Before you install your new timing belt tensioner, if you look here, the opening is a lot wider. If you look here, it looks like there's a race in there, which there is. So this is the old bearing. As you can see, this is the new one, so you have to bang that out. I already did it with a hammer, but essentially you just want to put a socket over it that's going to go right through the barrel. So I'll show you now. This is the back of it. So if you get a hammer and just bang at it, it should come right out. So that's the part there, and you'll just install it like that, and you're good to go. Now you can install your tensioner back on there. Alright, now you just go ahead and torque your timing belt tensioner and install your tensioner. And then we'll go ahead and install the belt. Make sure that all the timing marks are lined up and make sure that the belt goes on correctly. Alright, so before you install the belt, you want to use that battery tray rod and tighten it all the way down so you have the tensioner all the way opened. So that way when you do pull the pin, the tensioner is right there, and then it'll allow the tensioner to go ahead and apply tension to the belt, and then that's when you can set it and release it. Once you confirmed everything's lined up, then you can pull that pin out of the tensioner and then rotate the engine clockwise 6 full rotations and then recheck timing. Alright, so now that you have put the timing belt back on and the tensioner is back on, everything is buttoned back up, the covers, power steering pulley, the serpentine belt, as well as your tensioner. I did install a new tensioner as mine was really old, so that is a brand new tensioner in there along with the serpentine belt and the power steering belt. So with that said, it is good to go. So let me fire this baby up. Alright, fired right up. Sounds great. Engine is nice and still. Doesn't look like there's misfiring or bogging or anything like that. I already took the vehicle for a drive and everything is great. Response is great, it's not lagging. Everything is great. So with that said, that is all set. Go ahead and let your vehicle idle for about 15-20 minutes. Make sure you top it off with coolant before starting the vehicle. And then just let it go through its bleeding process and it should be good to go. Next, I got to replace the steering pump. That is no good, unfortunately.